The expedition to the cave system had been months in the making. Nestled deep within a dense, uncharted forest, the entrance to the cave loomed like a dark mouth waiting to swallow the intrepid explorers whole. The team, consisting of 5 members, gathered at the cave's threshold, their excitement and trepidation mingling in the cool, misty air. Leading the group was Dr. Rachel Anderson, a seasoned archaeologist whose passion for uncovering lost civilizations had driven her to the farthest corners of the earth. Her sharp eyes scanned the entrance, noting the ancient carvings that hinted at the mysteries within. Beside her stood Mark Turner, a historian with a knack for deciphering ancient texts and symbols. His fingers itched to run over the weathered stone, to decode the secrets it held. The team also included Sarah, a fearless spelunker who thrived on navigating the most treacherous caves. Lucas, an experienced climber and survival expert. And Ethan, a tech-savvy videographer documenting their journey for a documentary series on lost civilizations. Each carried a sense of purpose, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. As they switched on their headlamps and adjusted their gear, the cave's entrance seemed to beckon them forward. "All right, everyone," Dr. Anderson began, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Stay close and keep your eyes peeled for any signs of artifacts or unusual markings. This is uncharted territory, so we must be cautious." The team moved forward, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravelly ground. The cave walls, cool and damp to the touch, were covered in strange, intricate carvings. Mark paused frequently to examine them, his brow furrowing as he tried to interpret their meaning. "These symbols, they're unlike anything I've seen before," he muttered, running his fingers over the grooves. "It's almost as if they're trying to tell us something." "Or warn us," Sarah replied, her tone half joking but with an edge of unease. As they ventured deeper, the light from the cave entrance faded, replaced by the eerie glow of their headlamps. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the stalactites above. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling of being watched crept over them. "Did anyone else hear that?" Lucas whispered, stopping in his tracks. The others halted, straining to listen. Faint whispers echoed through the cave, indistinguishable yet undeniably present. "Probably just the wind," Ethan suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. He adjusted his camera, focusing on the dimly lit passage ahead. The whispers grew louder as they progressed, seeming to come from all around them. Every shadow seemed to move, and every turn revealed more of the ancient carvings. Some depicted scenes of daily life, while others showed haunting images of figures in agony, their faces twisted in fear and pain. "These carvings tell a story," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A story of a civilization that once thrived here, and of something terrible that happened to them." As they reached a larger chamber, the whispers intensified. The room was filled with artifacts, pottery, tools, and remnants of what appeared to be ceremonial objects. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, stained dark with age. The team gathered around it, a sense of reverence and dread settling over them. "This must be the heart of their civilization," Dr. Anderson said, her voice tinged with awe. "We need to document everything. This is an incredible find." As Ethan began filming, the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were not alone in the cave. Something ancient and restless stirred in the darkness, watching their every move. And then, from the shadows, a ghostly figure emerged, its translucent form barely visible in the dim light. It stood silently, its eyes, empty voids of darkness, fixed on the intruders. A chill ran down their spines as they realized the true nature of the cave. They had awakened something that had been dormant for centuries, and now there was no turning back. The whispers swelled into a cacophony of voices, echoing through the chamber. The ghostly figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the team in stunned silence. The ancient warnings had come to life, and the explorers knew that their presence had disturbed a fragile peace. As they stood in the heart of the haunted cave, the reality of their perilous situation became clear. The spirits of a long-lost civilization had been awakened, and the explorers' journey had only just begun. The explorers regrouped, their nerves frayed by the ghostly encounter. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavier, the whispers echoing in their minds. Mark's fingers trembled as he traced the ancient carvings on the wall, his historian's curiosity battling with a growing sense of dread. "We need to keep moving," Dr. Anderson urged, her voice firm but strained. "There's more to uncover, and we need answers." The team nodded, reluctantly tearing their eyes away from the altar. They followed a narrow passage that spiraled deeper into the cave. The walls closed in around them, the air thickening with the musty scent of age and decay. As they walked, the carvings became more elaborate, telling a story of a once prosperous civilization. Figures adorned in ornate robes conducted rituals, while others toiled in fields or crafted intricate artifacts. But soon, the scenes grew darker. Figures writhed in agony, their faces twisted in terror. Dark shapes loomed over them, indistinct but menacing. Mark halted abruptly, his flashlight illuminating a particularly disturbing scene. "These carvings, they're warnings," he said, his voice a hushed whisper. "They speak of a great disaster, a curse that befell this civilization." Sarah peered over his shoulder, her spelunker's instinct urging her to keep moving, but her curiosity held her in place. "What kind of curse?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Mark shook his head, his eyes scanning the intricate details. "I'm not sure, but whatever it was catastrophic. Look here." He pointed to a series of symbols that depicted a ritual. "This ritual, it seems to have gone horribly wrong. The spirits of the dead, they're bound to this place." Dr. Anderson's face paled as she absorbed Mark's words. "We need to document this," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "This could be the key to understanding what happened here." As Ethan filmed the carvings, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The explorers felt a chill settle over them, a cold that seemed to seep into their very bones. The sense of being watched intensified, and shadows flickered at the edges of their vision. Lucas, ever the survivalist, gripped his flashlight tighter. "We should be careful," he warned. "If these carvings are right, we're dealing with something beyond our understanding." The passage opened into another chamber, smaller and more claustrophobic than the last. The walls were covered in symbols, more urgent and chaotic. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something more sinister, a metallic tang that hinted at blood. "Look at these," Mark said, his voice trembling as he pointed to a cluster of symbols. "These are different. They speak of a prophecy, a warning to those who enter this cave. It says that disturbing the artifacts will awaken the spirits and bring about their wrath." A sense of foreboding settled over the team. They had already disturbed the cave's contents, and the realization that they might have triggered something ancient and malevolent gnawed at their sanity. "We need to be cautious with everything we touch," Dr. Anderson said, her voice barely concealing her fear. "We can't afford to anger these spirits any further." As they moved deeper into the cave, the symbols grew more chaotic, the whispers more frantic. The explorers felt the weight of the ancient warnings pressing down on them, the realization that they had disturbed something far beyond their control. They reached a dead end, a wall covered in intricate carvings. Mark's eyes widened as he deciphered the symbols. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This tells of the final ritual, the one that bound the spirits here." The team gathered around, the significance of the discovery sinking in. They had uncovered the heart of the cave's mystery, but with it came the terrifying knowledge that they had awakened something ancient and vengeful. As they stood before the wall, the whispers swelled into a deafening roar. The air grew colder, the shadows darker. The explorers knew that they were no longer mere observers of history. They were now participants in a centuries-old nightmare, and the spirits of the lost civilization were watching their every move. The ancient warnings had come to life, and the explorers could feel the eyes of the restless dead upon them. Their journey had taken a dark and perilous turn, and the way forward was shrouded in uncertainty and fear. The explorers stood before the wall of carvings, the gravity of their situation sinking in. The symbols were clear. They had awakened the spirits of a lost civilization, and the price for their intrusion was yet to be paid. "Let's move," Dr. Anderson urged, her voice barely audible over the whispers. "We need to find a way out of here and figure out how to reverse this." The team nodded in agreement, their determination mingled with growing dread. They retraced their steps, navigating the narrow passageways with their headlamps casting eerie shadows on the walls. The deeper they ventured, the more the cave seemed to come alive, the whispers growing louder and more insistent. Sarah, leading the way, suddenly halted. "Did anyone else feel that?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. The others paused, straining to listen. A cold breeze brushed past them, carrying with it a faint, ghostly wail. Lucas tightened his grip on his flashlight, his survival instincts kicking in. "We need to stay together. No splitting up." As they moved forward, the cave seemed to close in around them. The walls were adorned with more carvings, depicting scenes of rituals and sacrifices. The explorers couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, their every move scrutinized by unseen eyes. Ethan adjusted his camera, the lens capturing the haunting images etched into the stone. "This footage is incredible," he murmured, though his excitement was tempered by a deep sense of unease. "But we need to be careful." The passage opened into another chamber, this one smaller and more foreboding. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a dusty, ancient artifact, a small, intricately carved idol. Dr. Anderson approached the pedestal, her eyes wide with fascination. "This could be the key to understanding the curse," she said, reaching out to examine the idol. As her fingers brushed the surface, a chilling wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their headlamps and plunging them into darkness. Panic set in, and the explorers fumbled to relight their lamps. When the light returned, they gasped in horror. Standing at the edge of the chamber was a ghostly figure, its form barely visible in the dim light. Its eyes, hollow and black, seemed to bore into their souls. The figure raised an arm, pointing directly at the explorers. The whispers grew into a cacophony, filling the chamber with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Run!" Lucas shouted, his voice breaking the spell. The team turned and fled, the ghostly figure vanishing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. They raced through the twisting passages, the whispers echoing in their ears. The walls seemed to close in on them, the air growing colder with each step. Fear drove them forward, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, they reached a larger cavern, the ceiling towering above them. They paused, catching their breath, their eyes darting nervously around the room. The whispers had subsided, but the sense of being watched remained. "What was that?" Sarah gasped, her voice trembling. "What did we just see?" Mark shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, but it felt ancient and angry." Dr. Anderson's eyes were wide with fear and determination. "We need to keep moving," she said. "We have to find a way to reverse this. If that figure was a spirit of the civilization, it might be trying to communicate with us." Ethan nodded, his camera still recording. "Let's find a place to set up camp and regroup. We need to plan our next steps carefully." They found a small alcove just large enough to provide some shelter. As they settled in, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on them. They had encountered a ghostly apparition, a spirit awakened by their presence. The ancient warnings were no longer just carvings on the wall. They were real, and they were angry. Dr. Anderson examined the artifact she had taken from the pedestal, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings. "This idol is important," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We need to figure out what it means and how it ties into the curse." The team huddled together, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. The cave seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the whispers ever present, just beyond the edge of hearing. As they prepared for the long night ahead, they knew one thing for certain. They had awakened the spirits of a lost civilization, and their journey had taken a dark and dangerous turn. The ghostly figure they had encountered was just the beginning. The true horror of the cave was yet to be revealed, and the ancient warnings etched into the walls were a grim reminder of the peril they faced. Their survival depended on understanding the past and appeasing the restless spirits that haunted the darkness. The explorers' resolve was tested as they faced the unknown, their only hope lying in the ancient artifacts and the secrets they held. The cave was alive with whispers, and the spirits of the lost civilization were watching, waiting for the next move. As dawn approached, the team huddled in the alcove, their exhaustion apparent in their haunted eyes and trembling hands. The whispers had subsided to a low murmur, allowing them a brief respite, but they knew the danger was far from over. Dr. Anderson glanced at the artifact, turning it over in her hands. "We need to push forward and find more clues about this civilization and their rituals," she said, her voice firm. "There has to be something that can help us understand how to reverse this curse." The team nodded, gathering their gear and steeling themselves for the journey ahead. They moved cautiously, their headlamps casting long shadows on the cave walls. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, the whispers gradually intensifying. Sarah led the way, her spelunker's instincts guiding them through the narrow, twisting passages. As they rounded a corner, the cave suddenly opened up into a vast chamber, far larger than any they had encountered before. The ceiling soared high above, adorned with stalactites that glistened in the dim light. The walls were covered in more carvings, their intricate details depicting the life and demise of the lost civilization. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, surrounded by a circle of skeletal remains. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something more, an ancient, malevolent presence that sent chills down their spines. "Look at these bones," Lucas said, his voice hushed with awe and fear. "There must be dozens of them." Mark approached the altar, his eyes scanning the carvings on its surface. "These symbols, they're the same as the ones we saw earlier," he said, his voice trembling. "This is where the final ritual took place. This is the heart of the curse." Dr. Anderson stepped forward, her eyes wide with fascination. "We need to document everything," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "This altar could be the key to understanding what happened here." As Ethan filmed the scene, the whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with an eerie, otherworldly chorus. The skeletal remains seemed to shift and move in the flickering light, as if restless spirits were trying to break free from their eternal prison. Sarah's eyes darted around the chamber, her instincts on high alert. "We need to be careful," she warned. "This place feels wrong." The team spread out, examining the carvings and artifacts scattered around the chamber. As they worked, the air grew colder, the whispers more insistent. It felt as if the cave itself was alive, watching their every move with ancient, malevolent eyes. Suddenly, a chill ran down Dr. Anderson's spine. She turned to see a ghostly figure emerging from the shadows, its translucent form flickering in the dim light. Its eyes, hollow and black, seemed to pierce her very soul. "Everyone, stay calm," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to try to communicate with it." The team gathered around, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The ghostly figure moved closer, its presence filling the chamber with a palpable sense of dread. It raised a spectral hand, pointing towards the altar, and the whispers swelled into a deafening roar. Mark stepped forward, his voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his words barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. The ghostly figure's eyes seemed to burn with an otherworldly fire. It pointed again towards the altar, and Mark realized with a start what it was trying to convey. "The ritual," he said, turning to the others. "It wants us to perform the ritual." Dr. Anderson's eyes widened in understanding. "Of course," she said. "The spirits are bound to this place because of the failed ritual. If we can complete it, we might be able to set them free." The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their task settling over them. They had to perform an ancient, dangerous ritual in the heart of the haunted chamber, surrounded by the restless dead. Their survival depended on it. As they gathered the necessary artifacts and prepared for the ritual, the ghostly figure watched them with an intensity that sent shivers down their spines. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices urging them on, filling the chamber with an oppressive sense of urgency. The explorers knew that they were treading on dangerous ground. The haunted chamber was a place of ancient power and unspeakable horror, and they were about to confront its darkest secrets. Their every move was watched by the spirits of the lost civilization, and the success of the ritual was their only hope for survival. With a deep breath, Dr. Anderson stepped forward, the ancient idol in her hands. The team formed a circle around the altar, their hearts pounding in their chests. The whispers swelled into a deafening roar, and the ghostly figure raised its arms, guiding them through the ritual with silent, spectral gestures. As they began the incantation, the chamber seemed to come alive with a dark energy. Shadows danced on the walls, and the skeletal remains stirred as if awakened by the ancient words. The explorers' voices trembled, but they pressed on, determined to complete the ritual and appease the restless spirits. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, and the whispers more insistent. The ritual was nearing its climax, and the explorers could feel the weight of the ancient curse pressing down on them. They knew that their lives depended on the success of the ritual, and they steeled themselves for whatever horrors lay ahead. As they chanted the final words, the ghostly figure stepped forward, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. The chamber was filled with a blinding flash of light, and the whispers reached a fever pitch. The explorers braced themselves, their hearts pounding in their chests. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and the chamber fell silent. The ghostly figure vanished, and the whispers ceased. The air was still, and the sense of dread lifted, replaced by a profound silence. The explorers exchanged wary glances, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They had completed the ritual, but the true horror of the haunted chamber was yet to be revealed. They knew that they had only just begun to uncover the secrets of the ancient curse, and their journey was far from over. The eerie silence that followed the completion of the ritual was suffocating. The explorers stood in the heart of the haunted chamber, their breaths echoing in the stillness. They had performed the ancient rite, but the sense of unease remained, pressing down on them like a heavy shroud. "We need to get out of here," Lucas said, his voice breaking the silence. "Whatever we've done, staying here isn't safe." The team nodded in agreement, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. They gathered their gear and retraced their steps, heading towards the passage that had led them into the chamber. But as they reached the entrance, a deafening rumble shook the cave, and the ground beneath them trembled violently. "Earthquake!" Sarah shouted, grabbing hold of a nearby rock formation for support. The rumbling grew louder, and with a sickening crack, the ceiling above them began to collapse. Rocks tumbled down, blocking the passage and trapping the team inside the haunted chamber. Dust and debris filled the air, choking their breaths and blinding their vision. When the tremors finally subsided, the explorers found themselves surrounded by piles of rubble. The entrance was completely blocked, sealing them inside the cave. Panic set in as they realized their dire situation. "We're trapped," Ethan said, his voice tinged with hysteria. "We have to find another way out." Dr. Anderson took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Stay calm, everyone. There has to be another exit. We just need to find it." They turned their headlamps back on, the beams cutting through the thick dust. The chamber, once filled with ghostly whispers, now felt like a tomb. The carvings on the walls seemed to mock their plight, their twisted faces etched in eternal agony. "We need to search for another passage," Mark said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "There might be a hidden exit somewhere in the chamber." The team spread out, carefully navigating the debris-strewn floor. As they searched, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, faint but persistent. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and the sense of being watched intensified. Sarah's flashlight illuminated a narrow crevice at the far end of the chamber. "Over here!" she called out, her voice echoing in the darkness. The others hurried over, their lights converging on the crevice. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it seemed to lead deeper into the cave system. "This might be our only way out," Lucas said, his survival instincts kicking in. "I'll go first and see where it leads." He squeezed into the crevice, his movements slow and deliberate. The passage was tight, the walls pressing in on him from all sides. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the narrow space, and Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened, and Lucas emerged into another chamber. He called back to the others, his voice a mix of relief and urgency. "It's clear. Come on, we need to move quickly." One by one, the explorers squeezed through the crevice and into the new chamber. It was smaller and less ornate than the previous ones, but the air was just as cold and oppressive. The walls were covered in more carvings, depicting scenes of torment and despair. "We need to keep moving," Dr. Anderson urged, her voice steady. "There has to be a way out of this cave." As they pressed on, the cave seemed to twist and turn in endless, disorienting loops. The whispers grew louder, filling their minds with a relentless, maddening chorus. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision, and the sense of being watched grew more intense. Lucas led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The passage narrowed again, forcing them to move single file. The air grew colder, and the whispers seemed to wrap around them like a suffocating shroud. "Stay close," Lucas said, his voice barely audible over the whispers. "We're almost there." But as they rounded a bend, the passage abruptly ended in a sheer drop. Lucas stopped short, his flashlight illuminating a yawning chasm that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air was filled with the sound of dripping water and the faint, ghostly echoes of the whispers. "We can't go back," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "The way is blocked. What do we do now?" Dr. Anderson peered over the edge of the chasm, her mind racing. "There must be a way across. Look for anything that can help us." As they searched the edges of the chasm, the whispers grew louder, filling their ears with a cacophony of voices. Shadows flickered and danced, and the sense of being watched grew unbearable. They were trapped in the darkness with no clear way forward. Ethan's flashlight caught a glint of metal on the far side of the chasm. "Look!" he called out, pointing to an ancient rickety bridge spanning the gap. It was barely visible in the dim light, but it offered a glimmer of hope. "We need to cross that bridge," Dr. Anderson said, her voice firm. "It's our only chance." One by one, the explorers made their way across the precarious bridge, their hearts pounding with each step. The wood creaked and groaned under their weight, and the chasm below seemed to yawn wider with each passing second. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and the shadows grew darker and more menacing. As they reached the other side, the bridge collapsed behind them, plunging into the abyss with a deafening crash. The explorers stood in stunned silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They had made it across, but the true horror of the cave was far from over. They were trapped in the darkness, surrounded by restless spirits and ancient curses. The way forward was shrouded in uncertainty, and the stakes had never been higher. Their journey had taken a perilous turn, and the only way out was to confront the horrors that awaited them in the depths of the ghostly cave. The explorers stood at the edge of the collapsed bridge, the darkness of the chasm behind them. Their relief at crossing was short-lived, replaced by a profound sense of dread. The cave seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the whispers growing louder and more insistent. "We need to keep moving," Dr. Anderson urged, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. "There has to be something in this cave that can help us." The team nodded, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. They moved forward, the narrow passageway leading them deeper into the heart of the cave. The air grew colder, the shadows more oppressive. Every step seemed to echo with the cries of the long-lost civilization, their anguish and despair permeating the very walls. As they ventured further, they came upon a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were covered in more carvings, but these were different, more detailed and intricate. They depicted scenes of a thriving civilization, vibrant and full of life. But as they moved along the walls, the scenes grew darker, showing the rise of a powerful priesthood and the ominous rituals they performed. Mark's eyes widened as he examined the carvings. "These tell the story of the civilization's downfall," he said, his voice trembling. "They turned to dark magic, performing rituals that bound the spirits of their dead to the cave." Dr. Anderson's face paled as she realized the implications. "We need to understand these rituals if we're going to reverse the curse," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. At the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested an ancient journal, its pages yellowed with age. Dr. Anderson approached it cautiously, her fingers trembling as she opened the fragile cover. The journal was written in the same script as the carvings, and Mark quickly began to translate. "This journal belonged to the High Priest," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It details the rituals they performed and the catastrophe that followed. They sought to gain power over death, but their final ritual went horribly wrong, trapping their spirits in the cave." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "If we can find out what they did wrong, we might be able to reverse it," she said, her voice tinged with hope. Dr. Anderson nodded, her eyes scanning the ancient text. "We need to perform a counter-ritual to set the spirits free," she said. "But it's dangerous. We must be precise, or we risk angering them even more." Ethan filmed the journal, capturing every detail. "We need to find the materials for the ritual," he said, his voice steady. "Let's split up and search the chamber." As they spread out, the whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with a sense of urgency. The explorers moved quickly, their eyes darting around the room. They found ancient artifacts, candles, bowls, and other ceremonial objects scattered among the debris. Each piece seemed to hum with an eerie energy, a reminder of the dark magic that had once been practiced there. Sarah's flashlight caught a glint of metal in a corner of the chamber. She approached it cautiously, revealing a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside was a small, ornate box covered in dust and cobwebs. She opened it carefully, revealing a collection of ancient scrolls. "These might contain the instructions for the counter-ritual," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Mark and Dr. Anderson examined the scrolls, their eyes scanning the ancient script. "This is it," Mark said, his voice filled with awe. "We have everything we need to perform the counter-ritual." As they prepared the materials, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. The whispers reached a fever pitch, filling their minds with a relentless, maddening chorus. The spirits of the lost civilization were watching, their eyes filled with centuries of anger and despair. Dr. Anderson took a deep breath, her hand steady as she began the incantation. The others joined in, their voices trembling but determined. The ancient words echoed through the chamber, filling the air with a palpable energy. As they chanted, the cave seemed to come alive, the walls pulsing with a dark, malevolent force. Shadows twisted and writhed, and the skeletal remains stirred, their bones clattering ominously. The explorers pressed on, their voices rising in a desperate plea to the spirits. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the air grew colder still. The whispers swelled into a deafening roar, and the shadows closed in, enveloping the chamber in darkness. The explorers could feel the weight of the ancient curse pressing down on them, the spirit's anger palpable. As they reached the climax of the ritual, the journal in Dr. Anderson's hands began to glow with an eerie light. The chamber was filled with a blinding flash, and the whispers reached a crescendo. The explorers braced themselves, their hearts pounding in their chests. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and the chamber fell silent. The whispers ceased, and the air grew still. The sense of dread lifted, replaced by a profound silence. The explorers exchanged wary glances, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They had completed the counter-ritual, but the true horror of the cave was yet to be revealed. They knew that their journey was far from over, and that the spirits of the lost civilization were still watching, waiting for their next move. As they stood in the heart of the haunted chamber, the echoes of the past surrounded them. The cave was alive with memories of a once great civilization, its secrets and sorrows etched into the very walls. The explorers knew that they had only just begun to uncover the mysteries of the ancient curse, and the way forward was shrouded in uncertainty and fear. Their survival depended on their understanding of the past and their ability to appease the restless spirits that haunted the darkness. The oppressive silence that followed the completion of the counter-ritual was almost unbearable. The team stood in the eerie chamber, their hearts still racing from the intensity of the ritual. The ancient journal in Dr. Anderson's hands no longer glowed, but the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But why do I feel like it's not over?" "Because it's not," Mark replied, his eyes scanning the chamber. "The spirits are still here. We've only calmed them, not set them free." Dr. Anderson nodded, her face etched with worry. "We need to find a way out and complete the ritual outside. Only then can we truly be safe." The explorers gathered their gear, their movements tense and deliberate. The air grew colder, the shadows darker. As they made their way back through the narrow passage, the whispers began anew, more urgent and insistent than before. "We need to stick together," Lucas said, his voice firm. "No one wanders off alone." But the cave seemed to have a will of its own. The passages twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, leading them deeper into the labyrinth. The whispers grew louder, filling their minds with a cacophony of voices, each more desperate than the last. Suddenly, Sarah stumbled, her flashlight flickering out. "Wait!" she cried, her voice tinged with panic. "I dropped my light!" As the others turned to help her, a ghostly figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. The figure reached out, its spectral hand passing through Sarah's body. She screamed, collapsing to the ground as the whispers surged around them. "Sarah!" Dr. Anderson shouted, rushing to her side. But it was too late. Sarah's body lay still, her eyes wide open in terror. "We need to keep moving," Lucas urged, his voice tight with fear. "We can't stay here." As they pressed on, the sense of unease grew. The passages seemed to close in around them, the whispers growing more frantic. The air was thick with the smell of decay and fear. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking presence, waiting to strike. Dr. Anderson's eyes were drawn to a small alcove where a glint of metal caught her attention. She approached cautiously, revealing a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside was an ancient dagger, its blade covered in strange, dark stains. "This must be part of the ritual," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to use this to complete the ceremony." Mark's face paled as he read the carvings on the dagger's hilt. "It requires a sacrifice," he said, his voice barely audible. "A life must be given to appease the spirits." The team exchanged horrified glances, the weight of the realization sinking in. They had come so far, but the price of their salvation was steep. "We can't do that," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Lucas replied, his voice cold and determined. "We have to do what it takes to survive." The tension in the group was palpable, the air thick with fear and desperation. They knew what needed to be done, but the thought of sacrificing one of their own was unbearable. As they argued, the ghostly figures grew bolder, their forms becoming more solid and menacing. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, filling the chamber with a sense of impending doom. Dr. Anderson stepped forward, the dagger in her hand. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'll make the sacrifice." "No!" Mark shouted, grabbing her arm. "There has to be another way." But Dr. Anderson shook her head, her eyes filled with resolve. "It's the only way. We have to finish what we started." Before anyone could stop her, she plunged the dagger into her own heart. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the whispers reached a fever pitch. The ghostly figures wailed in anguish as Dr. Anderson collapsed to the ground, her lifeblood soaking into the ancient stone. As the light faded, the air grew still. The ghostly figures vanished, and the whispers ceased. The cave was silent, the oppressive sense of dread lifted. The explorers stood in stunned silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "We're free." But their relief was short-lived. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the walls of the cave seemed to close in. The ancient curse was not so easily broken, and the price of their salvation was yet to be fully paid. "We need to get out of here," Lucas said, his voice filled with urgency. "Now!" The team raced through the twisting passages, their hearts pounding with fear. The cave seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the shadows twisting and writhing around them. They could feel the spirits watching, their eyes filled with centuries of anger and despair. As they reached the entrance, the ground shook violently, and the cave began to collapse. Rocks tumbled down, blocking their path and sealing them inside. The explorers were trapped, the darkness closing in around them. They had made the ultimate sacrifice, but the spirits of the lost civilization were not so easily appeased. The true horror of the cave was yet to be revealed, and the way forward was shrouded in uncertainty and fear. Their journey was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The spirits of the lost civilization were watching, waiting for their next move. The explorers' survival depended on their ability to understand the past and appease the restless dead. As they stood in the heart of the haunted cave, the echoes of the past surrounded them. The ancient curse was a force to be reckoned with, and their only hope lay in the secrets of the lost civilization. The way forward was fraught with danger, and the true horror of the cave was yet to be revealed. The oppressive darkness of the cave weighed heavily on the remaining explorers. The air was thick with dust, and the lingering scent of decay. Dr. Anderson's sacrifice had shaken them to their core, but they knew that if they didn't complete the ritual outside the cave, all their efforts would be in vain. "We have to move," Lucas urged, his voice strained. "We need to find another way out." The team nodded, their determination mingling with fear. They carefully navigated the debris-strewn passageways, the walls seemingly closing in around them. The whispers had ceased, but the silence was even more unnerving, pregnant with the possibility of another ghostly encounter. Ethan held the camera tightly, documenting every step as a form of solace. "If we make it out of here, this footage will be invaluable," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. Mark led the way, the ancient journal clutched in his hands. "We need to find another chamber, one that connects to the outside. There has to be another exit." As they ventured deeper, the cave seemed to resist their progress. Passages twisted and turned in confusing patterns, and several times they found themselves back at familiar locations. Each wrong turn sapped their strength and tested their resolve. After what felt like hours, they came upon a large cavern. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like the fangs of some great beast, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust and bones. At the center stood another stone altar, similar to the one they had encountered before. "This must be it," Mark said, his voice filled with a mix of hope and dread. "We can complete the ritual here." Lucas set up the remaining artifacts, arranging them on the altar according to the instructions in the journal. Ethan documented everything, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the camera. Mark began to chant the ancient incantation, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. The air grew colder, and the shadows around them seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing in the flickering light of their headlamps. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the whispers returned, louder and more urgent than ever before. The spirits of the lost civilization were restless, their anger and despair palpable in the air. As Mark reached the climax of the incantation, a ghostly figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same spirit they had encountered before, its hollow eyes burning with an intense, otherworldly fire. It approached the altar, its presence filling the chamber with a bone-chilling cold. "We need to complete the ritual," Mark shouted over the roar of the whispers. "It's our only chance." Lucas and Ethan joined in the chant, their voices rising in a desperate plea to the spirits. The ghostly figure raised its arms, and the air was filled with a blinding light. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, and the ground shook violently beneath them. With a final desperate push, the explorers completed the incantation. The light intensified, and the ghostly figure let out a wail of anguish that echoed through the chamber. The ground beneath them split open, revealing a dark, yawning chasm. "Run!" Lucas shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him away from the altar. The explorers sprinted towards a narrow passage at the far end of the chamber, the ground collapsing behind them. The air was filled with the sound of falling rocks and the anguished cries of the spirits. As they raced through the passage, they could see a faint light at the end. The exit was close, but the cave was collapsing around them, and the way forward was fraught with danger. The passage opened up into a large cavern, and they could see the outside world through a narrow opening high above. A faint, cold breeze brushed against their faces, a welcome reminder of the world beyond the cave. "We need to climb," Lucas said, his voice filled with urgency. "It's our only way out." Ethan nodded, his hands shaking as he began to scale the rocky wall. The others followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. The cave continued to collapse around them, and the air was filled with the sounds of falling rocks and the anguished cries of the spirits. With a final desperate push, they reached the opening and climbed out into the fresh air. The ground beneath them continued to shake, and the cave entrance collapsed, sealing the spirits inside. The explorers lay on the ground, gasping for breath and filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. They had made it out, but the cost had been high. Dr. Anderson's sacrifice weighed heavily on them, and the knowledge that they had only temporarily appeased the spirits was a constant reminder of the darkness they had faced. As they looked back at the collapsed cave entrance, the whispers finally ceased, and the air grew still. They had completed the ritual, but the true horror of the cave and the spirits of the lost civilization would remain with them forever. The journey was over, but the memories of the haunted cave and the ancient curse would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They had survived, but the darkness they had encountered in the depths of the ghostly cave would never truly leave them. The collapse of the cave entrance behind them was both a relief and a grim reminder of the peril they had narrowly escaped. The explorers lay on the rocky ground, gasping for breath and soaking in the crisp, fresh air. They had survived the darkness, but the shadows of the ghostly cave seemed to linger in their minds. "We made it," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "We're out." Lucas nodded, his eyes fixed on the cave entrance that was now buried under tons of rubble. "But we lost Dr. Anderson and Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Their sacrifices won't be in vain." Mark stood up slowly, dusting off his clothes. "We need to document everything and ensure that the world knows what happened here," he said, his voice steady despite the grief that weighed on him. "We owe it to them." The remaining 3 explorers gathered their gear and began the trek back to civilization. The forest around the cave seemed darker, more foreboding, as if the shadows of the lost civilization still reached out from the depths. They walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their experiences pressing heavily on their shoulders. As they navigated the dense forest, the whispers from the cave seemed to fade, replaced by the sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. The journey back was arduous, their bodies and minds exhausted from the ordeal they had endured. After hours of trudging through the undergrowth, they finally reached the edge of the forest. The sight of their base camp, now abandoned and overgrown, brought a bittersweet sense of relief. They had survived, but the memories of the haunted cave and the sacrifices made would haunt them forever. "We need to get back to the city and report what happened," Lucas said, his voice firm. "People need to know the truth about the cave." "I have all the footage," he said, his voice resolute. "The world will see what we faced." The journey back to civilization was long and filled with a sense of urgency. They moved quickly, their determination fueled by the need to share their story and honor the memory of their fallen comrades. Upon reaching the nearest town, they contacted the authorities and presented their evidence. The footage and journal entries were met with a mix of skepticism and awe. The story of the ghostly cave and the ancient curse spread quickly, drawing attention from scholars, historians, and thrill-seekers alike. In the weeks that followed, the explorers were hailed as heroes, their tale of survival captivating the world. But despite the recognition and accolades, the shadows of the cave lingered in their minds. The whispers, though faint, still echoed in their thoughts, a constant reminder of the darkness they had faced. Lucas, Mark, and Ethan remained close, their bond forged in the depths of the haunted cave. They dedicated their lives to studying the lost civilization, determined to honor the memory of Dr. Anderson and Sarah by uncovering the secrets of the ancient rituals and ensuring that such horrors were never repeated. The ghostly cave became a legend, a cautionary tale of the dangers that lay hidden beneath the earth. Explorers and adventurers flocked to the site, drawn by the promise of uncovering ancient secrets and facing the unknown. But the spirits of the lost civilization remained restless, their whispers a constant warning to those who dared to disturb their eternal slumber. For Lucas, Mark, and Ethan, the escape from the cave marked the beginning of a new journey. They had survived the darkness, but the true horror of the ghostly cave would remain with them forever, a reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the sacrifices made in the name of discovery. Their story was one of survival, but also of loss and remembrance. They had faced the unknown and emerged from the darkness, but the echoes of the past would never truly leave them. The ghostly cave was a place of ancient power and unspeakable horror, and its secrets would continue to haunt the world for generations to come. As they stood at the edge of the forest, looking back at the path they had traveled, they knew that their journey was far from over. The darkness they had encountered was a part of them now, and the spirits of the lost civilization would watch over them, their whispers a constant reminder of the thin veil that separated the living from the dead. In the end, it was not just an escape from the cave, but an escape from the shadows of their own fears. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their bonds forged in the fires of the unknown. The ghostly cave was a place of horror, but it was also a place of revelation, where the true nature of courage and sacrifice was laid bare. And as they walked away, the echoes of the past followed them, a haunting reminder of the price of discovery and the enduring power of the unknown.